Today is July 26th, 2012, and I'm pleased to be talking with Kitty Hach Darrow in her apartment near Windsor, Colorado. Thanks for joining us, Kitty.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you as a guest. I'm delighted.
And I am hoping you'll give your permission for me to talk to you today and record your voice and picture.
Oh, absolutely. It's a history that I love to cover because it's so interesting to me.
When were you born and where?
Oh, okay. I was born October 20th, 1922. I'm 89 years old, and I was born in Buckland, Missouri. And it's just a small town, but it was a nice place to grow up.
Your father at the time had a Ford dealership, is that right?
That is right. Initially, my father was a Ford dealer. He said he was a Ford dealer when it was really good to be a Ford, an automobile dealer, because the roaring 20s were on. People had cash. They didn't have a car. They paid cash for their new car, and they didn't have a trade-in. And he said it was a good time.
So you had a beginning in life when your father had some resources, some financial resources. Is that how he bought his airplane?
Well, my father was flying in 1917. He was a long-time pilot ahead of that. And but in 1927 he had some money, and he bought a new airplane, and it was called a American Eagle, and it was 2 passengers in front and the pilot behind.
And you were 5 years old then. Did you get to
And
ride with
I
him?
was 5 years old, and I loved to go with him. And I would cry when he would say, "Oh, it's kind of rough today. I don't think you ought to go." And I would cry. And I knew then I was going to learn to fly.
That was pretty adventuresome for a girl to have that kind of outlook.
Oh, I had my own helmet and goggles, and I have pictures of me with them on at age 5. And but anyway, it was sure it was an unusual upbringing. My father had a hangar out on 40 acres that he rented, and we used that as our airport. But we had to share it with cattle.
You mentioned that you had your own goggle and helmet. I'm surprised it was small enough to fit such a petite person like you, and you must have been even smaller at that age.
Well, they were probably a little too big for my head, but boy, I wanted to be like the big guys.
You were a single child. You had no siblings, isn't that right?
That's right. I'm a single child. Yes.
Okay. So, did you go to a small school then in Buckland, Missouri?
Oh, yes, initially, and it was just a typical 6 grades, and then 3 grades, and then the high school. Mm-hmm. And it was only a town of about 700 people, so it was really a very modest beginning, I can assure you.
When did your father stop being a Ford dealer?
Well, the Depression came on, and of course, everything was going down really rather rapidly. Many of those kinds of details, I don't really remember all of that, but I know that he was able to sell the building, and really the dealership just closed. But he was able to sell the building. He cashed in his insurance, and with there, we bought a farm, 240 acres down in Sheridan County, Missouri, and then we sold the house and moved down. And then from then on, I was a Missouri farm girl.
Did you get experience with any livestock or crop production, or did you actually help on the farm?
Oh, well, I was certainly very much aware of the fact we raised wheat and soybeans, and I was very much aware of everything that went on. Mm-hmm. Was I involved? We did not have livestock. Mm-hmm. No, we were grain farmers.
I remember somewhere, though, that you might have helped raise turkeys.
Oh, well, well, came time to go to college, and there's what you need to go to college is called money, and I didn't have any money, and yeah, I think actually it was my mother probably who got the idea. Well, we could get a lot of turkey chicks, and we could raise them this summer, and then we would cash them in, and we would have enough money. Well, I'd been a pretty good student, and I did get a little scholarship to go to college, but but I raised the turkeys, and then, bless my mother's heart, she finished them up for me, because then there was a packing plant nearby, and they took all the turkeys, and I had $700.
That was a good sum.
Actually, I've never, did you do that 1 year or 2 years, 2 or 3 years?
Oh, no, I only did that the 1 year.
1 year.
Because,
okay.
well, then things kind of started getting a little bit better on the farm, and the folks, and I was going to school kind of pretty cheap, and
And now we come to the link with Ames, Iowa. Here you are, a young woman in Missouri, and the University of Missouri is a good school.
well, the freshman year, and where I got the scholarship was at a little girls' school. At that time, it was called Christian College, and my mother had some relations that were involved with it, and so I started there, and I did quite well, and then, but there, well, I had, my mother felt that it was important to get a major in home economics, and she thought the nicest thing I could do, if I could be a home demonstration agent. We had a lovely one, and it was a very nice lady, and she was kind of an idol, and my mother was very much impressed with her, and she said, if you could just be like her and be a home demonstration agent, it would be better than just trying to be a home ec teacher. And so that was my goal. And so I went to Christian College then and enrolled there. And then I was there for 1 year, and there I met the Anderson twins out of Minnesota, and or out of Iowa, Iowa. And they said, well, with that ambition, you should be at Iowa State University, where they really have a major in home economics, which they didn't have in this small girls' school. I think there were like about 400, 500 of us in there in school, three different dormitories. And so, much to my folks' despair, I enrolled at Iowa State, and then I had pretty good grades, so I transferred up there, and then I was at Iowa State.
But if I could just ask, I've heard you say before, though, that the University of Missouri is the only large state university in Missouri, and that your parents had always were very conservative, always had heard stories that the University of Missouri the Greek system was a little loose, and there was some kind of parties and so forth, and they really didn't encourage you to go to the University of Missouri because of that reputation.
Oh,
okay,
I don't know about maybe that was really the reputation, but I think they just thought I was better off in a smaller school. Because hey, look, for high school, there were only 48 or 49 of us in 4 years. Okay. And I was in a big class. We had 12. The class ahead of me was 7. It was really a pretty meager.
So Iowa State was a smaller school than University of Missouri at that time. I think today they're about the same size.
I think they are.
Okay.
But Iowa State would have been smaller at that time. Yes, I think that would be accurate. Okay. Because I think when I went to Iowa State, it was only about 8,000. And it was about like 1,000 girls and about 7,000 guys.
You know, I don't want to interrupt too many times, but I just say, I've always heard this story too, that at that time there was only considered 3 occupations for a female: teacher, nurse, or the county home economist. And the county home
and secretary.
And secretary.
Yeah.
So very few options, but the home economist was a technological leader of the county.
That's right.
And was there to kind of teach more advanced processes. So it was considered.
It would be more of a challenge for a smart girl.
Oh, yeah,
So
well,
that was
yeah.
more of a business career in a way.
Right.
Yes.
So
That-
we will put your experience on hold for just a second, if that's all right,
Sure.
because I would like to speak a little bit about your first husband, Clifford Hach, born in 1919, and a little bit about, he was from Iowa, though. Where was he from?
Oh, well, he was born in Cloutier, Iowa, and again, his father had a hardware store. Again, the Depression wiped him out, and he took everything and bought a farm and moved everybody on to the farm. So then Cliff grew up on the farm. And however, he was obviously not a farmer type, and he did not take to it, and he didn't like it, and he dedicated himself to what was the new at that particular time. He taught himself the Morse code, and he did it all out of a book, all by himself. And then he built a ham radio station, and he was on the air, and people were absolutely fascinated that here was this kid with a Morse code talking to people from all over, or I don't know how far, but he probably didn't go very far. But he was a licensed ham operator.
He demonstrated interest in science and technology
Yeah.
and experimentation
Right
right from the
away.
Right
beginning.
from the beginning.
And then, now, no one had ever been to college in the family, no one ever thought about it, but there was a farmer who came and saw this kid there with his Morse code and his home-built ham radio station, and he said, look, this boy has to go to Iowa State and major in this new major called electrical engineering. And then that was the first planning in his mind about going to college and electrical engineering and so forth.
Did his parents support this idea?
They were horrified
Marginally, yeah.
because it took money.
Yeah.
And that was, yes, I would say that, yes, that grandmother Hach, she was a smart woman. And she read to the kids, and she understood the importance of education. Yes, they were not backward people in that way.
So Cliff started to college in about 1938.
That is correct.
Okay.
And he went to school, and the tuition for 1 quarter was $38, and he had $38 in cash.
Now, what was his temperament like? What kind of a kid was he? Quiet or retiring, or I've heard he was kind of adventuresome and liked to do experiments and such.
Oh, well, yes, but that really, I would say that came a little bit later because he wasn't thinking about chemistry at that time. He was just thinking about electrical engineering, and which is actually a part of almost like a tragedy in the family, getting the money for those $38 each quarter. I would say it was on the quarter basis at that time, and $38, and then, but he rented a room, and he made up his mind just in a house, and he just studied like crazy. He knew that was the only thing, and he wasn't he was not a social guy at all. He was a student, and he did quite well in electrical engineering, and he did that for 2 years. And then he went to a lecture by Dr. Sweeney on the wonders of chemistry. And with that, he dropped the electrical engineering, came home and told his folks he had dropped electrical engineering and had re-enrolled in chemistry, and they almost died because money. How do you get the money? And then to go to school and so forth. However, then he got a little job at WI, and he was a radio station.
Yeah, for a short time.
He was an engineer at WI. So then he kind of started making some money, and that kind of eased it over. And from then on, though, he was a chemistry major.
But I would say there are I really put him in a class where there are people whose occupation is a calling. That it's a calling, like once they're exposed to it, they know they were almost predestined. And that, I would say for him, that was it. Chemistry was a calling. And his devotion and love of chemistry, the principles, the reaction, even the philosophical interpretation of the chemical reaction, that fascination stayed with him through his entire life. So, and not many people actually have an occupation where they have that much passion. So,
Well put, Bruce, well put.
Yeah.
We have you on the storyline now. You started to college in what year?
I started in 1940, and then I moved
Okay.
in 41 to Iowa State.
Okay, and so Cliff started in 38. So
Yeah.
we'll bring it up to 1941 when you were both on the Iowa State University campus. Where
Yeah.
did you live?
Well, we met in a Sunday school class called the Bethany class at the First Christian Church in downtown Ames. And it was
Ames
college
High.
class.
Yeah.
And actually, it was pretty good.
Keep going, that's fine.
Okay, it was, we had lectures and a lot of nice kids were there and everybody got all dressed up and here was this guy. And one time we got invited out to one of the farmers for a Sunday picnic at their house, the whole Bethany group, and we were playing baseball, and I got put on the same base with this guy, and we found out that the next day was our birthday. We had the same birthday on October the 20th, except he was 3 years older than I was. So from then on, we were a pair. And so we started going together, and it was obvious that I liked him, he liked me, and things were really going.
I understand that he recognized some talents in you from the very beginning. He gave you a book or something very early on?
Well, yes, he came to pick me up at the little house where I was living for a date. And he had this little package all wrapped up, and it looked like kind of like a little box of chocolates. And I opened it up, and it was a book, and it was by Dr. Otto Eisenschemmel on how we built the Sun Chemical Company. And he said, this book on Dr. Otto Eisenschemmel, and then Cliff said to me, Ned, you have to read this, because Mrs. Eisenschemmel was very important in the building of the Sun Chemical Company. And I've always said, I realized two things happened. Number one, this guy is determined to build a chemical company. And number two, I thought I had seen kind of a left-handed proposal of marriage. And it turned out that's what it was.
He obviously recognized that you would be a good complement for him in that process.
Well, yes, I think so. To say that we talked about that, no. I cannot say that we... Cliff was somewhat reticent. He wasn't he wasn't completely shy. On the other hand, that wasn't something that we had a conversation about. I think maybe some things, this is the way it's going to be.
Now you met in 1941.
I beg your pardon?
You met in 1941. No.
Yeah, probably.
Uh-huh.
I don't really just remember. I remember it was in October.
Okay.
In the fall.
And so when did you get married?
In 43. At the end of my junior year. On June the 4th, 1943. And of course the war was on.
Interject a little something
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
If I might. Clifford came from Marshalltown, the Marshalltown area. So that was an enormous break to have a land grant school 30 miles from where he was born.
Oh.
But also the transition, when he was a little kid, the transition to tractors hadn't even started. And he did tell me he despised farming and with a horse-drawn plows and so forth. And Kitty came from a very rural background. So I think between the two of them, I think they were determined they were going to do something other than what they knew, other than farming. And I think, so
Oh,
in
yeah.
a way, I think you were kind of knew there was going to be a business out there, or a,
Yes. Well,
an enterprise.
yeah.
And
Well,
it wasn't
Cliff
gonna
had
be-
told me he wanted to start a chemical company,
Right.
and to which I thought, a chemical company, the Depression was on, the war was on, everything was, what?
Yeah.
But I could see though that when I got that book, I knew this guy was gonna build a chemical company.
I kind of see you kind of had a little bit that commonality that, I mean,
Well,
once you lost the farm
yeah.
dealership, then you were now a farmer, and you just weren't going to be farmers. And,
No,
and that there's
yeah.
a bigger world out there, and there's more
Yeah.
intriguing things to do.
Well, I was interested in business. I
Yeah,
like
that's what I
business.
thought.
And in fact, and Bruce, this is a story you don't know, because I really haven't told this one before. But I lived in a dormitory where there was no extra food ever available. And I got the idea, by gosh, if I would go down and buy candy bars at the wholesaler in downtown Ames, and I would bring them back, and then I would put them out then at the regular price,
Yeah.
and I could make money on it. And then I get on the bus and go down and come back with these big boxes, and put them underneath my
Yeah.
bunk, and so I had and it was run on an honor basis because I couldn't take no one ever cheated, and they'd bring in their nickel and they would take a candy bar, and I was making money.
Actually, that was the first occupation of Warren Buffett. He bought 6 packs of pop and then sold them individually.
Really,
And
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You and Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
in
in
the same.
in my
same
little
line.
bitty way.
Yes.
No, I think you became the big way. I think we need to chat just a little bit about Clifford Hach's chemistry experiments and what happened in college. So this was the war effort, so we need to talk a little bit about how he got hooked up with people who were doing really good
Okay.
science.
Yeah.
All right, he had a reputation. He was a crackerjack analytical chemistry, and he really became a pet, so to speak, of the head of the analytical chemistry department, and he was very, very good at it. The war was on, and the Manhattan Project was in Ames, Iowa, and they were looking for chemists to go in for the purification of the materials that would be going into the atomic bomb. I don't know how to say it more softly. That's just simply the way it was. And Cliff got selected as one of the chemists. And I knew that the FBI had come and quizzed me, and I had no idea what was going on. But all of a sudden, Cliff was gone with the Manhattan Project. And he was not then, well, he had tried to, he was trying to apply to go into the Navy when they told him, you are being deferred permanently on the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
And so that's where he was, at Ames, Iowa, in the Manhattan.
They really valued his intellect.
Yeah,
Because they were wanting young men like that to serve. So he
Oh,
must have been a prized scientist.
well, and then I know that he and his partner purified thorium that went into the bomb. He was absolutely, he had taken a sworn statement, and he never violated it one iota. But when it was over with, I said, what did you really work on? And Charlie Neer was his partner, and Charlie was a graduate chemist, but he was a military man.
Mm-hmm.
And then Clifford then worked with him, and they were a pair. And then they purified the thorium that went into the bomb.
So he had his college years suspended while he
Yes.
did this work
He hadn't
for the
graduated-
military.
He didn't even have a bachelor's degree at this point.
Wow.
Oh, he didn't have a bachelor's degree. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and I'm just going to throw one other thing too. This is to me these unique little opportunities that come up in life. I read the story of how it's a very unusual and way too long how Dr. Frank Spedding came to Iowa State. It's a unique story, and it's in a lot of happenstance. But he was one of the nation's foremost physical chemists with a PhD out of Berkeley, and he worked for Fermi and Seaborg, and he was tops. And so he was in charge of, that's right, the chemical processes for the purification of uranium. So he brought a whole bunch of chemists in. So there was an enormous intellectual
Stew.
I mean, of the highest order. And so Clifford, my father, really did get an enormous informal education, working on all of these chemical processes and formularies, and that was just unbelievable that opportunity was there. But it is true, he selected a small number of undergrads to be advanced technicians, advanced or junior researchers, and Clifford was one of them. So it was an enormous good fortune.
Now, I'm thinking kind of in the same area, you can correct me wrong, mid-1940s. Clifford also was working on some things I think the Navy was interested in terms of fire extinguishing chemicals and that sort of thing.
Oh, well, yes, that's true. And that led to a different story here because they were working with oxygen carrying compounds, and they were extracting oxygen. And then that led to another, but I think we have one more pause before we come into that.
Okay, let's fill the gap.
All right, the war finally got over,
yes.
and Cliff hadn't graduated yet. I think he was only like a couple of quarters short or something.
Right.
So, we went to work to get him through school, and he got his degree, and it was just like it is today. There were no jobs. He graduated. He actually graduated in the spring, in the March, I think, of '47, and no jobs. And he went around and couldn't find anything, and it's just tough. Well, anyway, but he finally got a job part-time at the General Filter Company in Ames, Iowa, and as an analytical chemist, because they were working with water. And however, but Cliff knew nothing about the water field or anything. And so they told him, now you go down to the Ames, Iowa Municipal Water Treatment Plant and get to know the guys down there and learn everything you can about because this was a filtration company. They were not chemists, they were filtration. All right, so Cliff goes down there, and gosh, he just loved the guys and they loved him. They taught him everything about the water treatment plant, and he loved it. Everything was just going great. And then he came back, and we were married and had this little apartment, and he said, I remember him saying something to the nature of, the guys are just great down there, and they know everything about treating water, but they don't have any chemistry. They don't know anything about it. So he goes back to his company in General Filter, and they gave him then a copy of the American Public Health Standard Methods Manual. And in there was a nice section on water treatment. And I remember he brought it home, and we laid it out and started to look at it. And it was a whole bunch of procedures done by universities all over the United States. And what the American Public Health had done was to say, you at this school, you take chlorine, or you take hardness, and you take chlorine, and you take fluoride, and take all the different elements that you wanted to analyze. And so then they started coming in, and Cliff realized there was no commonality anywhere. All of these procedures came in. They were all required solutions. You can't ship solutions. They freeze, they break, and he knew that and then the procedures. I remember the words he said to me. He said, this is classical analytical chemistry, and there's not a chemist down there. Could Cliff do the procedures? Nothing to it for him. Could the boys down at the plant? No way. They were very bright. They knew exactly what they were doing in the filtration and the care. And he said they do add treatment, but they do it by weight. He said they have no idea about the chemistry of it. And so with that, that really stimulated him then into the chemical analysis of water as a project. And I knew in the back of that mind there was always the chemical company, and that possibly here was a product line. You can't start a chemical company without a product line. You've got to have something.
Yeah,
And so there was the stimulation for that.
for the water treatment, or for the water analysis, yes.
Yes.
So, I guess I was thinking, to start a company though, you also need some money, you need some capital.
Well, that's right.
You
And
need
we
an idea.
sure didn't have any of that, let me tell you. Okay, yes, as we have already mentioned, he worked with the oxygen carrying compound. And then there was a request up on the bulletin board from the Walter Kitty Company out of Belleville, New Jersey.
And now this would have been a bulletin board at Iowa State University?
What that?
Was that a bulletin board at Iowa State University, the way you saw this?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sure it was.
Okay, all right. Just make-
Yeah, and that they were interested in anybody who would be interested in building a machine for the generation of carbon dioxide for fighting fires on board ships. That was what Walter Kitty was after. And Cliff said, you know, I think I'd like to take a whack at it. And so then he started working on it, and he got a machine up and running, contacted the company, and they sent out a man who had a background in chemistry, Mr. Novell, I think as I remember his name. And but he was a lawyer. He was a patent lawyer, but with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. And he came and he looked at it, and he said, well, it's interesting, it's clever, it's not finished. And of course Cliff agreed. But he said, what? If you are willing to sign off on the patent, we will own the patent, but we will pay you $15,000.
And
And
this is
that
in about
was-
what year was this? About
Oh boy.
46?
47?
46 or something?
45.
No, because he graduated in 47. It might have been then like about 48.
Okay, all right, just to kind
Actually-
of place it.
Yeah, 48.
Actually, I was born in 46. So you were in New Jersey in 46.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
so it'd be 48
Mhm.
would be
Yeah,
at the time of the patent.
Okay,
And there were, under this umbrella of the Manhattan projects, there were some ancillary projects on the side. And I think Clifford was working on,
some were going concurrently, is what you're
all
telling me,
going
yeah.
concurrently, and he was assigned, he was given the patent, awarded the patent on this oxygen extraction
Mhm.
technology, so forth, that the Kitty Company picked up on.
So now you got money and an idea.
And so then, and then with the money then came a little 3-room cement block building,
Yeah.
and that's where the whole company started. And the back room was the laboratory, and the middle room was a kind of a manufacturing, and the front room was to be kind of like a little office. That was it.
So 3 rooms, cement block building, am I thinking on South Duff, kind of near, near the river? The creek.
Yeah, it's the Squaw Creek.
Squaw Creek,
Squaw
yeah.
Creek was coming right back.
We bought 1 acre from the Lane Western Company next door
Mhm.
to us, and I think it cost $540.
Well, actually, another very interesting thing. And Clifford was working as a subordinate to a relatively well-known quantitative analysis chemist, Dr. Harvey Deal. And so Dr. Deal, once this land was purchased, this story that I've heard, that Dr. Deal asked all of the graduate students in chemistry to give 1 day to help lay the foundation for the building of the building down on South Duff.
Well, I don't know whether,
Well,
I
I've always-
suppose Deal.
But that's not true. It's part of our mythology. But I've
Well-
always heard that the
Well,
chemistry
but
students all came in for
people
1 day.
came down, the graduate students came down and volunteered and,
Well, I always heard that Dr. Deal sort of put pressure on him to do that. And
oh,
so,
well, that that's
yeah.
interesting. I hadn't heard that one.
So anyway, we had some chemistry students helping lay bricks
Uh-huh.
to launch this little building.
That's it.
And so, what was the bread and butter business at this 3 cinder block building? What was the first bread and butter business? I understood it was some of the analytical chemistry samples.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, that's right, that we took some of the money and we bought a little company that Dr. Deal had been involved with for the manufacture of standard unknowns for the teaching of analytical
That's right.
chemistry at the college level.
Right.
And that was a little business that produced between $5,000 and $6,000 a year.
But that money was probably critical. The 5 or 6, because it was a little cash flow, and there were the little. I remember the little boxes of vials with they were pre-spiked, predetermined, unknown, and then those were sold to the colleges, and then they could do the test.
And you see, the professor got the code sheet,
Right.
and I think there were 24 samples with a little cork in them, and they were steel samples, and
It was still probably critical, because if you can't have a business just on an idea and just thinking. I mean, there was a product, the product was going out and cash was coming in. I mean, as small as it was, it still provided a continuity of a business. And
Well,
that was
yeah.
probably important.
well, and learning, because neither one of us had, we didn't have any background in business,
But you started small.
and yeah, well, indeed we did.
Yeah.
But it was obvious that there was, but that was certainly the beginning of the business.
It was a business.
And it was called the
Standard sample?
Standard Sample Company.
I'm going to put it on pause just a second to think about family life.
Okay.
Because we were talking about the Hach Chemical Company, but I can't ignore the fact that this is really a family operation.
Oh,
You
yeah.
had a daughter who is older than Bruce.
Yeah. Yes.
2 years.
And then, so you have toddlers and little preschoolers around here too that Kitty
Oh,
you're
yeah,
dealing
well, the
with.
kids were down, at the plant, and, yeah.
All day. That was your playground.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
and of course, somewhere in here, you always have to tell that one joke. Cliff had a good sense of humor, and Mary and Bruce were quite close together. And Cliff used to tell the story about that we were working so hard just to keep the wolf away from the door, and then the stork kept coming in the window. But then there's about a 6-year gap then before and then
So
Paul
when you-
arrived. And then that is the family: Mary, Bruce, and Paul. Three
So when
great
you
kids.
started this operation 47, 48, we can say in general, and you have 2 little children, what was your day like? When did you get up in the morning? What did you do? Because you were a part of the company from the very beginning.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was going to answer a little bit of that. This was the 50s, the late 40s and 50s, and it was an enormously trusting world. And I will have to say, I just went out and played on my own. And then there was a river, and I had played the Squaw River, all kinds of imaginary games. But there really was no threat. There was really no, and
No structure to it.
But
You just got through day in and day out.
yeah,
But you got up, you probably fixed breakfast for the whole family. Yeah.
Well, yes, I guess you did. Actually, that's kind of a blur in my mind.
But I will say, if ever there becomes an epitome of what is the maximum sacrifice or the maximum commitment a person can make to start a business, the answer I think would be live at the factory. And because he had experiments going on that were time sensitive, that were hours would take place for the reaction to be finished. So he was working all weekend, get up in the middle of the night and transfer something else. But on the other hand, if he came in and did that on an 8-hour-a-day basis and tried, it wouldn't have happened.
Oh, no.
So it was a 24-hour commitment.
So you had 3 rooms that were the business, and then you had like a kitchen and a great room and a bedroom upstairs?
No, well, later on. Now, well, we had a little rented 3-room apartment, and but we of course Cliff wanted to get near the plant,
You
and
live at the
then
plant.
my folks and Cliff's folks gave us a little extra money, and with that little extra money, we built another room on the building, and we had an apartment in there, and then we moved into that. It was very crude. However, we had a bathroom, and we had a bedroom for, well, actually, there was a little room for the boys, and
We had bunk beds.
yeah, and so we had a
Right.
3 little room, and then a living room and a kitchen.
It was actually 2 doors down from Skateland, the roller skating rink. Yeah.
And though the building is all
Yeah.
gone now, you know, but,
You know, one other little sidelight. We were down there for 30, 40 years, and really only had a couple of floods.
Yeah.
But today it's flooded. So we were really very fortunate to not
Yeah.
have had more flooding than
Yeah.
we did.
So I'm thinking you probably started living at the plant site, maybe 1951-ish?
Yeah.
Kind of
yeah,
around in that general area?
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
And then and that's also for the. I got along pretty well with it. I found the whole thing kind of interesting. I knew it was a little bit offbeat, but I still found it interesting and an adventure, and I really did love being kind of having the river to play with and so forth. And also, we were only 8 blocks, about a mile from Lincoln School, so I could actually walk to school. So we had a lot of independence. It wasn't bad. I will say my sister did not adjust as well as I did. She thought this was just a little too much, but I actually found it somewhat provocative, exciting. I had a feeling something important is going on here,
And there was.
And there was.
So the company was first called what, Kitty? It was.
originally it was called the Hach Chemical and Oxygen Company because back with the oxygen. However, then of course we told you how it became carbon dioxide, but that all got dropped and it just became the Hach Chemical Company.
Okay, so I had read a quote somewhere that you said that you bought the company 3 times. Is that because you had partners that you had to buy out? I'm just guessing.
Oh, yes, oh boy.
You probably had some
There's-
partners to start out
one-
with.
Well,
there is one bad experience in all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. As the company began to grow, there were people were recognizing this might become something. You know, actually, we were so immersed in it, you don't have the bigger picture. But there was a boy. Now, I really don't care to name names.
That's fine. That's fine.
But there was a chemistry professor who had a lot, as he was very proud to tell you, business experience, and he recognized that there was something going on here, and so he loaned us while we were going along, but boy, had so little money, and it was growing, and we needed money, and we were at a very desperate time, and we had no money, and you couldn't borrow any money, and you know, who's going to loan somebody some money on something as crazy as this is? And he loaned us. I can't remember anymore whether it was $2,100. What can you remember what the amount was, Bruce?
I didn't know it was quite that low.
But
No.
what?
I didn't know. No, I never.
Well, it was $2,000 and something, 2,000. But he had it in there then, and he put it in at a pretty heavy interest rate. And I realized we were being taken, and I just couldn't get to the cliff. This was not something Cliff was really interested in, and yet I was writing the checks, and I knew how much the interest was. It was on a monthly basis, and it was a compound interest on a monthly basis, and I knew this was wrong, but I couldn't do anything about it, and so that's why I say that we bought the company back at that time.
Is it still fair?
But I don't care to
Yeah,
go any further.
It's still, I think, still fair to say that even after the war was over, again, this cadre of chemistry professors had positions at Iowa State and stayed in town. So there was a kind of a brain trust of chemists. The majority of them were very nice and offered pro bono support. It was just this one.
That is correct.
And the chemistry group, and I'll throw a few names out. The chemistry group really were our personal friends. There was and famous names, not Dr. Spedding, I guess, but sort of Rundle, Hansen, Dr. Duke. They were good people. Dr. Fritz, they were good people, and their children about the same age as us. And so I actually considered us kind of a part of the Ames
in our
chemistry
own
community.
Even though we were not a part of the
University.
academia, but we were certainly a part of chemistry.
That was our family social circle, and they were nice people, good people, except for this one episode.
And many of and some of this has remained to this day. Actually, just one of the last people that was very close to us, where the wife even came down and did some work because she was a math major and she helped me set up some things mathematically that I did not have the experience. That was June,
I appreciate you answering my question about that, because some people might look at your life and say it's very charmed and everything fell into place in a lovely way. But I think it's important for people to know that there are obstacles. And that was one of the things that you had to figure out and move forward.
But we finally got him paid off. But then we had to buy him out. So we paid off the $2,000 plus all that interest, and then I'm really going to say I was the one that really, I knew this, we could not go on. Well, I told Cliff I'm not willing to go on with him being a part of the company, and so.
But you trusted your instincts on that.
The Union Story Trust. Now be very careful about what all you keep here. But the president of the Union Story Trust and Savings Bank was very much aware of all of this, and he did the negotiation, and then set the price, and everything was done at the Union Story Trust and Savings Bank. It was all up and above board. Everybody was involved, including, of course, because the bank had to loan us some money. And so then we've got, so we not only have the chemistry professor to buy out, but of course get the bank paid off. So it was a nip and tuck. But golly, you just put your shoulder to the wheel and you do it.
Exactly. Well, let's talk a little bit about the chemistry associated with water and making sure that water was softened or purified and measured and that kind of thing. So talk to me a little bit about the products involved there. How did that come about? How about starting with EDTA, for example?
With what?
EDTA, for example.
The EAP. I need to go back before that. The tests were very crude for the analysis of water.
Right.
Because, nobody, as I have said to you, that was just a kind of an offshoot of work that had to be done. But there wasn't a good test for hardness in water. And there was a patent that was issued by the Hall, I think it was the Hall Chemical Company, and with a Dr.
Schwarzenbach.
Dr. Schwarzenbach, that had realized that there was a product called EDTA, ethylene diamine tetraacetate, that would tie up calcium and magnesium in water, and you could make a titration. But you had to have a buffer, and you had to have an indicator, and none of those kinds of things had been developed. But gosh, it was Cliff that found an indicator that was eriochrome black tea, and which is used to dye rugs. It worked very well in that particular, and then he developed the buffer, and so there was the development of the first product of a hardness titration, and that was very startling because they never the test before that was called was a kind of an empirical test of where you would measure a water sample in an Erlenmeyer flask, stopper it up, and then add a standardized soap solution, and then you would shake it, and then you would look at the suds, and you would determine how the suds were standing up. So if the suds fell down, it was pretty hard. If the suds stood up, it was pretty soft.
Pretty loose.
And you talk about an empirical test that was there. Okay, and so this titration was very accurate with burettes and everything, and that was the beginning. And from there, then came all these. Then of course, then Cliff realized, hey, wait a minute, we've got to have the chlorine, and we've got to have fluoride was coming on at that time. Manganese was in all water,
So cities were your biggest clients to start with.
Yeah, well, you begin to realize, boy, this is the nucleus that we're looking for.
And you had no competitor.
Not really at that time. No.
Not really.
No.
This was forward thinking.
I always like to say that where Hach was really the first to pre-manufacture the reagent, because under this standard methods, they had to make it themselves. So we had to pre-manufactured reagent, pre-measured, and then actually then Clifford developed a way to automatically set the wavelength for when we got into the photometers to electronic, and then the instrument would be as dedicated to the process as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So predetermined wavelength selection, pre-manufactured reagents, simplified instructions, and then all of the procedures and equipment was all in one box, and that had never been done before. Otherwise, the others had to pull all the components together.
But how do you convince cities to buy this? How do you
Well, we didn't have any salesmen, we didn't have anything, and
that's
so
my
then,
point.
and then, we got the idea, we'll sell it by direct mail. And of course, and this is exactly then what we did. And of course, we didn't have any catalog or anything, but at that time, out had come the color of photographs and then there was guys that were taking pictures of a motel, and all that, and came the color card, and we got the idea that on the we'd put the colors were great, and they were very vivid for chlorine, and very deep yellow, and then for iron was 2,2-bipyridine, I remember, and that was a beautiful lavender color, and about that color. And how are we doing?
Good.
Okay, and so then we would show the picture of it, and the Erlenmeyer flask with the chemistry, and then on the back side would be the instructions, and then we just and then I put them in a typewriter, and you would address it to the chief chemist, Ames, Iowa Municipal Water Treatment Plant, Ames, Iowa, and that's all you needed. I put a stamp on it, and we mailed them out, and we got the names of the towns out of the Rand McNally, the travel map book, and the orders started coming.
So please go on. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Well, I can remember the day we got 10 orders. Oh my word!
Yeah.
That called for a celebration. Of course, the celebration was probably a piece of cake in those days.
So when did you know that you were going to your company was going to take off. Was that kind of that 10 orders in one day? Did you have a moment of knowing?
No, I cannot. Look, you are working just as hard as you can work. You don't even, I didn't even think like that. And and somebody once said to me, when did you put together, or how did you put together a business plan? And I laughed out loud.
Well,
We didn't have a business plan.
Pardon for me for being specific, but how did you know how to price your product?
That might have been a bit controversial, because Clifford wanted the price
okay.
so low that the product would be attractive and easy to buy, and he might have underpriced things. I think this 5B test kit, the titration for was $5.95.
Yeah, well,
But
we
there
were trying to keep track of how much it would cost, and then we would multiply by 5 or something like that, but in our little bitty way, we were really doing a cost analysis, though we certainly weren't thinking about it in that, and of course we were aware of the fact that, you have to pay the taxes on the building, and of course by this time we started adding a few people, not many, but you were adding a few people, and you began to realize there are expenses. So, but we, but really, I would say there was a cost analysis that we developed in our little bitty.
Yeah.
way.
And I think that was basically labor, overhead, and materials times 3. That was
Well,
that was
I
one.
think we had the time 5.
Yeah.
Was,
But
what
it is
we
true,
did.
though, I still think a part of the business was, in right or wrong, and I think in the end, Clifford had a bias towards keeping the price as low as possible.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just it was for competitive purpose. He really wanted the accessibility. He wanted it to be easy to buy, because I really think in many respects, he had more interest almost in the acceptability, the technical competence and acceptability of the test than he did money. Money just wasn't a driver.
Oh, he was, look, if Cliff had money in his billfold, I went down to the bank and took some money out and I would put it in his billfold. He never, that's right. Money was not, I think Bruce has a very keen point here. But you see, actually, not realizing what we were doing, we kept down competition.
Sure.
Because nobody was really interested in trying to compete with the dumb little guys out there in Ames, Iowa.
And then one other thing to which we have a strong.
And then we started getting our foot in the door, because every time somebody would order, then I would record that down, and then that person would get on the mailing list.
Yeah.
So I was developing the mailing list.
And Clifford also, this was a big deal, and this was where he would have been cross purposes with the business world. He wanted to expand the parameters, irregardless of the market potential of the parameter. He wanted to have all these tests available. So by about the mid-1950s, we had this DREL. It had 39 different parameters, but many of them were very obscure. But that turned out that worked, because nobody else had one, and so the parameters were expanded irregardless of their business potential. But in the end, and then the price was low, and those are counterintuitive business principles.
Yes.
But they worked. Yeah.
One of the things you had going for you, though, was you did all the work initially. You kept it small. I mean, you waited until you said that you could hire people on, that it was probably just too much. I mean,
And little by little though, of course, Cliff and I continued to go to that Christian church, and so we'd hire some people who didn't have a job, but they were good, honest, hard-working Iowa people who were absolutely dedicated. And one of the guys just died the other day, about 102, Cap Torkelson, and one of the very first employees.
Okay, then I can say this then, that so Clifford, he's obviously into the lab. He's into the lab and developing these parameters, and he's getting faster and faster and better at it. But then the people would place the order by mail, so that meant that we were available by telephone. So then that was what Kitty did, was she was beginning to build a business base and so that business base in the end by year 2000 was up to 200,000. But one customer at a time, and then take the phone calls, and then also be extremely cordial on a service basis. If anything went wrong, would send you another product at no charge, and almost just. And so then that left Clifford to be in the lab, because this wasn't really his interest. Was the administration, the business processing, the finance.
This goes back to the book he gave you
Yeah.
on one of your first dates.
So, yeah. So Kitty was doing that, and the phone calls were coming in, and they wanted to know when their order was, or they'd ask, and so we became a mail order company. And I think it's safe to say, I've always heard this, we were the first mail order company in the history that would sell quantitative analysis chemicals
I don't know that, I'm never
by
sure
mail,
that's exactly
by
right.
mail. By mail.
No, nobody else was
It's
doing
never
it.
been done before. And there was another, Clifford had a huge bias against this. They did not want to put it into a supply catalog and have it be represented by other people. They only wanted to deal with the customer.
You're vertical.
Yeah,
Yeah,
vertically
yeah.
integrated.
Yeah.
It's crazy in today's world, but it was vertically integrated. But it also kept all the feedback coming back to the company. And I know.
And that was important, because ideas would flow in.
And I remember hearing this discussion when I was very small, that if you gave the product or sold it through like a Fisher Scientific, they'd triple the price. They would triple the price and then keep that for their profit, and then we wouldn't even know who the customer was. So customer retention was huge.
That's a
Huge.
very keen point that Bruce has
it was
brought
huge.
up.
And then-
Customer retention,
And so Kitty did the business part, the business model, the business plan, and that was her deal.
I'm going to come back to airplanes in flight here for just a second. And
Yeah.
so you loved flying when you were 5 and 6 years old.
Yeah.
When did you get back in a plane again?
My mother fell and broke her leg, and of course we were working like beavers, and I said, I just got to go down and see my mother. I was the only child, and Cliff said, look, go out to the airport, because I know that they're giving charters. Earl Howard will give you somebody and take you down there, and you don't have to stay overnight. You can go and you see your mother and then come back, because boy, you got to get to work,
Now, can you give me a year reference here, approximately? When did your mom break your leg? Her leg? Can you give me a year reference at all?
Yes, I can. It would have been. Let me see. We have to see. I got my license about the next year. I got my license in 1954,
Right.
and so she would have broken her leg, I think, in 53.
Okay, good. So you're flying down to see your mom. At
Yeah.
Howard's.
Yeah, and oh boy, that just electrified me. I took me back. Of course, and then look, we're working like beavers, and you're not thinking about flying. But with that trip, and I remember the pilot that took me down was Paul Ferguson, and I knew, hey, look, I want to learn to fly. Well, things are getting a little bit better now for us, we're making some money and so forth. And so then I started taking lessons, and then I got a license in 1954, a private license out there at Earl Howard gave me the check ride, and that's where I got started.
So how much flying did you do for personal reasons, and how much flying did you do for business reasons?
That's pretty hard to, because obviously there were times that we could use the airplane, and we did. And of course, then as the company grew, well, then it finally, then of course, it had its own airplane, and in time, then we even know in time, finally we had 2 pilots and there were 2 airplanes, and so there was a lot of flying because we were going all over the United States, and we were still a direct mail company, and with a lot of customers everywhere.
So you would make personal calls on customers.
Oh,
Is that how the plane was
yes,
used?
we did some, and yeah, and there was. I took advantage of the airplane anytime that I could.
Yeah.
But-
Well, I would say probably a lot of the times it was a kind of a group meeting. Like here would be one, a good example of that. Almost every state had a waterworks association. So they would be the providers, the people who administered, and they'd have their, and so they would have a state convention. And so you could go to a place like that and there'd be lots and lots of potential customers and existing customers. So it was often to go to some type of a large group meeting. None of our, that's the other thing, all of our customers were small. They were buying into 4 or 5 parameters, that's all they did. So we didn't really have that many huge customers. It was really spread over
Yeah.
vast numbers of people buying a small amount of our stuff.
But I can see how Kitty would be a great representative, flying into those meetings, and
Yeah.
a good-looking woman who's smart. I bet you were good with the.
Well, that it was a lot of fun, and I tried to work in flying any time that I could, and but
But it did factor in the business development. I mean, it was personal and business.
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, but I do think that a lot of people recognize that we were quite aviation oriented company, which kind of made you a modern
it
company.
did have a little bit of symbolic dynamism. You don't see that very often. And so here comes an airplane landing, so you're right. It was maybe even a little bit important. It was helpful from almost a symbolic standpoint. Although once the planes got a little bit bigger, I think the business part of it got toward the end. Because the little planes, they were also very subject to weather. You could,
Oh yeah.
you couldn't fly through bad weather, so there's limitations too.
Kitty, I know you've fielded this question before, so
That's okay.
you're probably well rehearsed. You were a partner in a company before there were business programs for women, before there was a template to know how women should act in a business world. So first of all, how did you know what to do?
You never even gave it a thought. I know. Yeah, that's right. I've been asked that. I never. Look, I just grew up with it. I knew what I had to do, and when we would go to these the American Waterworks Association AWWA meetings at the big convention. Hey, I just worked the booth, and and I could run the tests and so forth because they're easy to do, and I never even gave it a thought. However, I'll tell you a cute little story that when you see that one from the Chemical Heritage Foundation, the next person I think on that is Mary Good, who's president of the American Chemical Society. And we were exhibiting at the American Chemical Society, and I anymore I don't even remember where it was, but in a big convention center, type of thing. And of course the men would have to go to the restroom, and they would have to line up, because everybody would submit. And then I would go to the ladies' room, and it was just one other lady there, and it was Mary Good. And I've always said I met Mary Good, president of the American Chemical Society, in the ladies' room.
I bet there are women, though, that seek your advice. because of your experience working in the business world?
You think that there are women who
Yes.
would like advice?
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, I'm not sure that I think you have to, all right, I'll say it this way. I think you have to be yourself. You have to know, you had to know the product. You had to know what had to be done, who was the customer, and what the customer needed. And it was just a matter of instinct. You knew what to do. And was there a book or something? Heavens no.
Well, I don't want to leave too much of the history as a gap, but you did go public in 1980s, right?
No,
No,
1968.
1968, 1968, I'm sorry. Yes. What was that like?
Well, I would say first of all it was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody, my little joke is that everybody who was anybody was going public in 1968. That was the
Yeah.
biggest time for IPOs ever in the history of the stock market.
So there was a romance at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's right. And it was and of course we had struggled with money, and here was a chance to go and to sell a little stock and get some money, and I'll say again, it was a mistake. We were too young. I think our sales at that time were about like $1,700,000, and we were too young, and we shouldn't have done it. It cost a lot of money to put out quarterly reports, and all of a sudden we were sophisticated, and we were not really ready for that. However, we did it because we had to do it, and we did, and of course in our way we did grow and so forth. However, I wish that we had waited longer, and it would have been a whole lot better. However,
Again,
That-
there
that's
are
the history
lessons
and
that
the-
people
that's
learn.
the-
That's the way I can only visualize this. We'd done a whole series of expansions down there in the South Duff plant. And that was getting to be a little bit hodgepodgey because they just weren't flowing together. Actually, there really was risk on that river. Being
That's
the
right.
whole plant tied up right, 50 yards away from a river. And so the industrial expansion that was available to us was out there on Dayton Avenue. And so there's high ground. But I do know this, I can remember this, I remember Cliff saying this very well, and it was, he wanted a loan to get a building big enough. He thought, if you're gonna build a building, do it in one fell swoop. We just had gone through the bad experiences of one little tiny room a year. He wanted a big building, and the banks wouldn't offer the money. They thought it was too big, and they wanted him. I could see this almost more clearly now than I did at the time. They wanted him to kind of recreate the same thing all over again. Have a little building, build another building when the business gets bigger. He wanted the big building. And it turns out, I think he was right. It was
yes.
better to get that thing done, and even if it was larger than we really needed. And so the banking community just wasn't helping. Yeah.
And the local bank, the banker is gone, dead now. He wouldn't loan us any money, and he said, "Well, you don't need money because you've got everything was paid for at that time. We had no debt at all."
Yeah.
And he said, "You don't need money, and Bruce has stated right, just one room at a time, and just keep growing very, very conservatively." And he was a very, very conservative, old-fashioned banker, and that was his. And so he contacted the banks in Des Moines and said, "Yeah, it's entirely possible that Cliff and Kitty Hach are going to come down and want to borrow money, and they don't need it, and they're my customers." And they don't need it, and I want you to say no.
That's really, it seems very inappropriate for him.
What that?
It seemed very inappropriate for him to have done that.
Oh, well, of course it was. And we didn't
We
know
were
it, but so we went down to, and anymore I don't remember the names of the bank. But and in our little bitty way, we laid out our spreadsheet, which we were getting sophisticated enough that we had a spreadsheet. And of course, there was no debt, and we went to this one particular bank, and the guy just said, no, no. And boy, I just couldn't understand, but, so then we went to, I think it was the Valley Bank. Is that it?
Valley
is
Bank,
that Valley
is it?
Bank, and
Mhm.
I think that was it. And we went over there, and laid out the spreadsheet, and the guy looked at it, and he said, you need money to grow. And he said, I've been instructed not to give it to you. But he said, I'm going to. And he did.
Mhm.
And he gave us the money to build this building that Bruce has described.
Yeah.
Well, we bought in our typical nickel and a dime way, we bought the 10 acres and got it paid for. Because you have to have, and you realize, and then they made us, we had to put in the foundation and have the foundation paid for before we could get the money out of the bank. But actually, we did that. We had the building laid out, the foundation in, and we got the money.
Well, I would kind of like to conclude this on a good summary note, some positive feelings. What would you like to say or have people remember about the Hach Chemical Company?
The Hach Chemical Company was absolutely homegrown by good Iowa people who worked very hard, were very diligent, were smart, and they were proud of what they did. I would say that. And there was probably, there's a lot of farm influence in there of this little at a time, and yet the company grew, and as it has continued to grow, actually, the division has passed over $1 billion in last year, and so it went worldwide, and yet really the base is still Ames, Iowa.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, Bruce Hach and Kitty Hach Darrow. It has been my pleasure, and thank you for contributing your thoughts to the Ames Historical Society's Oral History Bank of Conversations. Thanks again.
Well, the pleasure has been ours.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, we went over.